This podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp. Life is hard sometimes, and there are many pathways in navigating the inevitable ups and downs of life. In riding these waves, I look to my yoga practice and also therapy. We all go through tough times like big life changes, periods of instability, conflict, or loss. BetterHelp connects you with a licensed therapist entirely online, which is very convenient, flexible, and suited to fit your schedule. Take the questionnaire and get matched with a licensed therapist. And if it's not the right match for you, no worries. You can change your therapist for no additional charge. Sometimes getting started in therapy is the hardest part. To make it a little bit easier, go to the link provided in the show notes or go to visit betterhelp.com/yogaandpodcast today to get 10% off your first month.
Vibing out in the sun, we welcome everyone. Gave 101, the goal is having fun. I'm happy, like I told ya. I'm stretching out, doing yoga, not stopping till it's over. Don't want the day to be done. I'm happy, like I told ya. I'm stretching out, doing yoga, not stopping till it's over. Don't want the day to be done.
Welcome, friends, to Yoga and Podcast. This show highlights the science and brings the magic of yoga and mind-body practices down to earth for the everyday person to help you live your best life. I'm your host, Ashley Weber, a yoga and Pilates teacher and forever student who is oh so curious about all things yoga and. I'm super excited to share with you this upcoming conversation. Now, let's sit back, relax, and enjoy the episode, y'all. She is a therapeutic yoga teacher here to share her knowledge and experiences with cannabis. She is a certified Ganja yoga teacher and trained in the trauma-conscious yoga method. She'll help us to understand the relationship between cannabis and yoga and how to approach an elevated yoga practice. Please welcome back to the show, Anna Gingrich. Hey, Anna, how are you?
Hello, Ashley. I'm doing really well today. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm super excited about this conversation today. You presented me with this topic, and it took me a minute to understand, and I love learning about this stuff. So thank you for sharing your knowledge.
Of course. Yeah, I think I floated this idea to you like over a year ago where I was like, if you ever want to talk about this, we can talk about this. And you were like, okay. And when you came to me, I was like, it's time. It's time to talk about it. So I'm really excited.
Yeah. So I think we'll dive right in. Let's talk about you and your initial relationship with cannabis.
So for me, my relationship with cannabis feels like probably a lot of people's. Like the first time that I ever used it, I was a lot younger. I think I was in like 8th grade. Mm-hmm. And it was really experimental at that point. Like I wasn't really actively using it for any specific purpose. It wasn't until I got a little bit older, like just past high school and then through college, where I was using it more regularly. And I would describe my relationship with it to be somewhat of an over-reliance, although it wasn't apparent to me at the time. This is all in retrospect that I can say, oh yeah, this is kind of how I would define this phase in relationship to this plant. Then in 2018, 2019, I took time off where I wasn't using it at all. And then it wasn't until like late 2019 where I welcomed it back into my life, back into my experience in a much more conscious and much more mindful way. So that is where we are now and why I feel comfortable and excited to talk about it, because my relationship with this plant has evolved a lot over the years, and I know that some people haven't even really had the opportunity for their relationship to evolve. I think a lot of people have difficult experiences or overwhelming experiences or anxiety-inducing experiences and don't have the tools or the support to be able to try again in a different way, in a more mindful way, and having the support to allow them to like experience all the really great benefits that are there. So
yeah, well, when our conversation on the phone, leading up to this interview, I had some difficult experiences with cannabis, and so I was delighted to hear that this can evolve and you can add mindfulness to it. It really piqued my interest. Okay, so how did you find Ganja yoga, and what was your first experience like?
So like I mentioned before, it was like late 2019 when I was about to go into my room and like do my yoga practice. I had been a yoga teacher for like a year, a little less than a year at that point, right? So my home practice was like very important to me. And all of a sudden I felt this like call or this pull to like re-engage. Like I had cannabis, but I just wasn't using it, and it was fine. And this day it was like, you need to go get high. You need to go get high. And I was like, what? Are we sure? Like I knew that the first time that I was going to do it again, it was going to be for a purpose. I just didn't know what it was yet, right? And so I'm like, okay, well, I guess I'll just do that then. So I go, and then I go to my mat and I proceed to have like one of the most spiritual experiences of my whole life, like really thus far. What I know now is that I experienced a healing, like a complete activation and healing of my root energy space. I didn't know that at the time. I wasn't aware, but I can identify like where in my body I was experiencing the healing, where the energy was coming up and where it was moving to.
Wow.
It was a huge theme just around safety. It was a huge theme around safety. So if anybody's familiar with chakras or energy centers, that's a really big theme for the Root Center. It's kind of what it's all about: stress, safety. So it was I don't know how long I was there. And I don't know how it started, and I don't know how it ended, but I kept repeating to myself this like mantra. I had this like Rolodex in my brain and my mind of all of these memories and all these times where like I didn't feel safe, and I felt like I was in these scary situations and circumstances in my life. And the previous relationship that I was in, I had a lot of those experiences. I didn't see them as that at that time, but it was many years, like 5+ years, where I was consistently in situations and environments and around people that didn't feel safe to me. And it took a huge toll on my health. But again, I don't know this at the time. It's only in retrospect that I can see this. So as I'm going through these images, I'm feeling this energy rushing through my body. This mantra comes up, and it's just like I have to keep repeating to myself, like, I'm safe, I'm safe, I'm safe. And I'm like bawling. I have this strap. I'm like holding my leg out, and this energy is moving from my root out through my foot. And I'm like, I'm safe, and I'm bawling. And it's just this like wild thing that, by the end of it, I felt like an extreme sense of peacefulness and calm. Like my body had settled, my mind had settled. Like I was definitely tapping back into the safety and ease of my present situation, because I couldn't have said to myself like I am safe if I wasn't, right? So it was like this very big reminder of where I am now and what I'm doing now, and this thing that I need to focus on and heal. And that was the first time that I ever did it. It was the first time. That's what's so crazy, and why I was like, oh my gosh, like, has anybody done this before? What did I just do? What has happened? Like, I had used this substance for so many years and yet never experienced it in this way.
Yeah.
And that's when I realized that this thing that I was doing and that I enjoyed so much had some really wild benefits and like things to be explored.
That is so cool, so profound. Like I have tricep chills right now. You're describing that. So why do you think yoga and cannabis just go so well together? Like, why is the combo, why was that combination so potent?
That's a really good question, actually, because I think that if you ask different people, you would get a lot of different answers. Mm-hmm. But the thing that feels true for me, and that I think is a thread for a lot of people who do this practice, is that in our normal life, like in our day-to-day conscious regular existence, there can be this barrier that exists between your mind and your emotions, right? They feel very separate, and oftentimes it is necessary and important to have that wall up, to have that distinction depending on where you are and what you're doing. You can't always kind of live between or allow the emotions to come up. So with cannabis, what ends up happening is that this wall turns more into like a really thin veil. Like it's just not so, there's more of an easy connection between the two. So this can cause a variety of experiences for people who smoke cannabis or who ingest it in whatever way, right? There's like a ton of different ways to use it, right? Not just smoking it. That's just what I usually do, so that's kind of why I always say it. But, and what I mean by that is whatever emotional experiences you are having in your life and in your body, when you smoke or when you get high, that veil is going to become very thin, and all of a sudden these emotions are going to more easily come up. Like you're going to have an easier access to them. And if you're not in a place or with people or in a situation where it feels safe to do that, to feel those things or address those things, this is where those feelings of anxiety can start to become very strong, can start to become very you can feel very isolated, you can feel scared, you can feel overwhelmed, right? It shows up in a lot of different ways, and this is how a lot of people will actually describe their first experience smoking, right? Because very rarely are you like on your best friend's couch, right, with like her cats and her plants, and you're like, okay, now we're gonna smoke a joint for the first time, and all you need to do is breathe, and we're gonna relax. We're going to relax, and if you feel uncomfortable, you can just lay down. No, okay? My first time smoking was out of a stinking Pepsi can, bro, with a group of like 10 people. I have no idea who I was with. Like, and the first time you smoke, usually you also don't even get high. That's something that I found people is like resonant no matter who I talk to. Or they're like, the first time you try smoking, like you don't even actually get high because you don't know what you're doing. And it's fine, right? You don't know what you're doing. But the reason I bring this up is because very rarely is our first experiences so safe.
Oh,
so safe.
yeah, I can
Rarely
attest
is it
to
so
that,
safe,
yeah.
right? And so this can make people say like, oh, no, well, I don't like the way it makes me feel, and I don't like what it does to me, and I don't, all these, they can kind of point to these negative experiences that they've had. And, when you recognize and realize what the plant actually does, right? Because cannabis is in the entheogen family, which is related to psilocybin, also related to ayahuasca. Like these are like, cannabis is like the closest one to us. It's the most like gentle variation is like a better way of saying it. Like it comes on quick, leaves quick, not like psilocybin, and definitely not like ayahuasca, right?
Yeah,
but they are all in this family. They're all interrelated as a psychedelic, as a sort of state altering or perspective or reality altering substance. And when you recognize it as such, when you give it the respect that it deserves, and understand how it affects you and how you want to work with it, you can engage with it in a much more conscious way, right? So the flip side to that is considering the two main things, which are set and setting. Right? Setting, what are all these things outside of myself? Where am I? Who am I with? How much time do I have, right? Is there something that I have to go to in an hour or 2 hours, right? Or do I have 4 hours or the rest of my day, right? To be able to relax into this experience. And then there's set, which is what you're coming in with within yourself. What's coming from your mind, what's coming from your heart, what's coming from your emotions, what's present here, right? So when you say, okay, I'm choosing a setting that feels safe, I'm aware of the set that I'm coming into, or maybe I'm not, but I'm willing to open myself up to it to see what's there. That is then when you have the opportunity to use cannabis as a very valuable tool for your own growth path. Because when we talk about how everything is stored in our bodies, and like when we move our bodies, like energy moves, things change. And cannabis essentially allows us to more consciously engage with that process. If you've ever like gotten high and like felt the desire to move your body, like, oh, to stretch, or like, oh, do all these things. Now for years, I never really had that experience. But once I entered the slower movement space, like with yoga and things like that, that's when I was like, every time I would get high, I'd be like, oh my God, I just gotta move, I just gotta take up space, because you can feel your body. It deepens that connection. It deepens your connection to your emotions. It deepens your connection to your physical body. So consciously engaging with this practice of getting high and doing a yoga practice, whether that be asana, whether that be meditation, whether that be pranayama, right? All of these different things can be enhanced if you are conscious with how you're engaging.
That is beautiful. That is that makes me want to try it. Like
mission accomplished.
So you mentioned yoga practices. What type of yoga do you practice in Ganja yoga?
So there are many different, as probably everybody here knows, like many different styles and ways to practice yoga. So there's no specific way. In the Ganja yoga teacher training, so that's led by Dee Dussault. She's the teacher who pioneered it here in North America. So she started that in like 2009. She was like the first Ganja yoga teacher. And so she's been doing it for a really long time. But in her training, one of the required readings that we have to complete before we even start is called Move Your DNA. So this is a book that's about biomechanics. It's by Katie Bowman. And all of her specific titles about who she is and what she does, I cannot offer that to you off the top of my head. But she's really smart, and her website is really awesome. But she's all about moving the body in new and different ways in order to promote overall health, overall well-being of the physical, right? Like that's very much about the physical. And so when we get high and when our connection to our physical body is deepened, like we can just feel things and sense things that we maybe wouldn't normally sense so easily. That's really, it's just like heightens it, right? This stuff is always already happening, but you can connect with it more. You can feel it more. So for that reason, usually the practices that I will do and the practices that I'll do with other Ganja yoga teachers as well are slower. So it's things like, I'm a therapeutic yoga teacher, so I'm absolutely implementing therapeutic modalities like somatics and isometrics and myofascial release, like all these different pieces, right? But yin yoga, restorative yoga, that's like every week I'm doing that. At least once a week I'm doing these like elevated restorative sessions because they're so important. And that feeling of like relaxation that you can also get. People will often talk about like falling asleep or just feeling really tired. Like work with that, work into that, like engage with that in a different way. Like instead of just laying down and closing your eyes and trying to nap, like coming into a supported child's pose for 5 minutes, or for example, there's about a million things you could do. But the focus is to deepen and strengthen the sixth sense. So it's our sixth sense now, formally. A number of years ago, the sense of interoception was added to the list.
Oh, I didn't know this.
The interoception is your awareness of your inner body, where things are inside of you, right? And so you already know, we already do that.
Yeah.
Right? Like
yeah.
in yoga, in Pilates, and all these different things, like we are already deepening our interoception. So the practices that you do in elevated sessions, in Ganja yoga sessions, the purpose is to deepen that, to explore that, because it's not about doing the most. And there are some physiological things that happen, right? This like parasympathetic activation that can happen where you wouldn't really want to be like up and moving and doing a bunch of stuff. Like you really are trying to kind of wind the body down, wind the nervous system down, regulate all these different things. So that is more of the route that we go down in Ganja yoga practices. It's just like slower, more mindful, no rush, right? Pause, feel, think, notice, right? You can even get into emotions and other things like that. So yeah, it's rich.
That is, and it's a variety. It's still used to slower yoga is quite the variety still, which I love, and I love slower yoga
All day.
What do you say to those that might be a little resistant to the idea of cannabis and had a negative experience? I mean, you touched on it earlier, but like, what would you specifically tell them?
What do I want to tell you now that I had this platform? Let's see. First of all, you don't need it. First of all, you don't need cannabis. You don't need it to be able to have these experiences in your yoga practice. It's not required, but it is actually something that has been around for a very, very long time, specifically cannabis and yoga. It is alluded to in the Rig Vedas. There's this spiritual sacrament that is referred to as Bang, right? B-H-A-N-G. Bang, bong. I learned it as Bang. And while the language doesn't specifically say, like, this is cannabis, researchers and scholars have determined essentially that it's very likely that that's what it was, right? It's what they did. So it does have ties to spiritual practices. And so it can be a spiritual experience if you want it to be, but it doesn't have to be that. And if you do not want to engage because of negative experiences, right? That's different than just never wanting to do it because you don't want to do it, which is fine. But if you had a negative experience that fueled this potential fear, is what I would probably call it, then I encourage you to consider exploring it, right? For me, it's always been a very personal journey. Like, I don't ask for permission to do things, like to try new things and to experiment with things, right? Like, I didn't find Ganja yoga and then decide to do Ganja yoga. It was this thing that sort of naturally evolved. So if you feel this sort of pull toward it, then I encourage you to follow that. And if you need help with that safe container, with like how to approach it and what to use, right? Because there's, like I mentioned before, there's so many different methods for consuming and using cannabis. Finding a teacher, finding somebody who does these things, who hosts these things, who is a guide for other people through these things, right? Everybody is a little bit different, but having somebody who's able to help you navigate it, to let you know that no matter what happens, you're safe, that no matter what happens, you're okay. That is probably the most important thing to consider, is what I would say. There's this there's this sort of rule or thing that we like to say in the Ganja yoga teacher training, and it is to assume that we all love you.
Ooh.
It's to assume that it's all good, or at least it's balanced, right? Just giving yourself permission to relax.
Oh, wow. I feel more relaxed when you said that. I was like, oh, cool. Well, beautifully put, because I've kind of in that category of like having bad experiences and talking to you more about it. I'm like, ooh, why wouldn't I want to I do feel pulled. So thank you. Thank you for enlightening me, enlightening us. Would you care to guide us through, or just kind of brief us through, and what an elevated session looks like exactly?
That's a good question. I would say that,
without giving too much away.
Sure.
Right.
Sure. Yeah. I'm like, let me think about these sessions that I've done, because I only do them virtually right now. So usually we spend the first, like these sessions, I make them 75 minutes. I make them a little bit longer, just a little more relaxed, right? And we spend the first 15 minutes just before we get on our mats. We come with our method ready to go. So like for me, like having my pipe ready, or the other person having their bong ready, whatever it is, right? And checking in, how are we doing, what are we thinking for today's practice, right? Like, is there anything specific that is coming up for you, either in your mind or your emotions or your body? And so we sort of reflect on that intention and use that as we imbibe, as we sort of come into ceremony together. It's a way to think about it. It really is. So when we're both consciously coming together and saying we're going to use this plant in order to guide a session of healing is how it works. So they all look a little bit different after that. Same in the sense that most of the time we're moving very slowly. But depending on the person, depending upon, whatever it is they have going on, most of the people that I can't even really say that. I can't even say most. People will typically either come with one or the other. Either it'll be something very specific physically that's going on, like an area of their body that has been giving them a lot of trouble, or something that's just not working right or moving right or just causing a lot of pain. Or it can be that exact same thing but in an emotional sense, right? There's something very specific that they are working through in their relational life or in their emotional life or their inner world that they want to explore. And that is, I think, a word that could accurately describe every session. It is a session of exploration. Right? We're not here to solve a problem or get to a specific end. It's very much about acknowledging what is present right now and working with what is coming up, because that is the gift that cannabis offers, is that connection to what is real, connection to what is coming up and is present in your life right now. So I don't know if that answers your question at all.
No, it does. It does. It's the essence of what that session would look like. Yeah, and it sounds like every session is going to be different.
Yeah.
I love it.
Sometimes we're crying. Sometimes we're laughing. Sometimes we're just doing restoratives. Sometimes we're just meditating. And a lot of times it's just a combination. You know, a lot of different things. So
that's so cool. So just to be clear about your personal growth journey with this, it was basically your relationship with cannabis has changed, right? And healing has occurred. I'm sure there's been more healings than the initial one since, right?
Listen.
Not to get too personal.
No, bro. You would be correct. You would be correct if you made that assumption. God, since 2019, I've thought about this a couple times where I'm like, how many times have I engaged in this way? And it's hard to tell, it's important to have sober practice. It's important to have practices where you're not using it. And that, I think, is a personal journey for every individual, because my experience is what it is. And it is what got me to where I am now, right? And so what is true for me, what is right for me, what is correct for me, couldn't possibly be the same as somebody whose journey with the plant is completely different.
Totally.
It's completely different. So I feel like I've been working up to this my whole life, unknowingly, right? You know how you have to learn your lessons. There's wisdom and things that you don't get to know until you know it. And you don't know it until you
experience
it until you do it.
Yeah.
So for me to have all of these years where I was using it in a way that almost numbed me to my experience because I wasn't in places where I was able to process or in places where I was able to truly express what was happening, it kind of pushed me in the other direction.
Wow.
Does that make sense?
Well, that's been my experience. Yeah.
Okay. So when I took that break and when I said, okay, I don't have to be in this pit, there's nothing for me there, and I know that I do love this plant, because it's not like all of those years every experience was a bad experience.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
But the amount that I was using it made it so that most of my experiences were not that great. They were not that great.
Yeah.
But I knew the good ones were there, and I was like,
yeah.
those are what I want to connect with. And I didn't know at the time exactly what that was. It was usually when I was by myself. It was usually when I was by myself, right? Like, now I don't get how does anybody. Like, it's very specific. It's very specific people that I will do that with, because I'm aware of all of these things now, and I know. I know what happens when you're not in the right energy or when you're not in the right headspace, and but I know that I'm going to be okay with that, right? And that's to jump back, to my personal experience, is that I've spent a lot of time with it, not only with the plant itself, but reflecting upon what the journey has been, reflecting upon what the journey has been like, and where I am with it now, and what it does for me now, and how I like to use it with other people too. So, yeah.
That's so cool. What are your thoughts about the body high versus the head high with cannabis?
Oh, yes. This is something that I heard a lot about when I was a younger person. Like, everybody would just talk about it. It was like this sort of like, do you know yourself? Do you know your weed, is how we would call it, right? Like, do you feel this in your head, or do you feel this in your body? Like, what do you
say
think,
it like that.
man? Yeah, they did. Right? They did. Okay, and I was like, I don't know, right? And I'm like, I don't know. What do you mean, do I feel this in my head or in my body? And I think I was around people recently who were using this sort of, what's the right word? Like this language to describe the experience, right? And and I don't really identify with it, because I never really found that terminology helpful. Like, I never differentiated my own experience in that way. Like, I was never able to say, oh yes, I feel this in my head, or I feel this in my body, because what we need when we get high, I feel like, is different, and your ability to recognize and discern what your needs are. I think it's like, if you don't have that level of awareness of like what I'm doing and why I'm doing it, then you actually can get stuck in the head.
Oh, wow.
You can get stuck in the head, and so you just are constantly trying to analyze and understand your experience instead of being in your experience, instead of having your experience, right? So isolating that awareness of your experience to only your head or only your body, it is like a contradiction. It's like a contradiction to the gift that we are given when we are engaging with cannabis, which is the union of the mind and the body. Right? So I would never say that like people are wrong in saying, like, I feel this in my head or I feel this in my body. But I think it's like, for me, like, that's not deep enough. Like, I feel it in both all the time. But I'm connected to both, and I actively keep that channel open, and I work back and forth within it.
Yeah.
So I think that there's more to be explored. Right? If you feel yourself getting stuck there, like, oh, where do I feel this, or what's happening, right? Like, that's just the surface. That's just the surface level. And if you're able to kind of like allow yourself to go a little bit deeper, and instead of saying, is my experience right, or is it what it should be, just saying, what is my experience, right? What is happening? What do I feel?
The inquiry.
What is coming up? Exactly. That inquiry, that exploration, that curiosity.
Oh, this has been such a good conversation. Where can we connect with you out in the world, Anna?
So out in the world, I have a website. I just launched it this year. It's just, yes, I know. It's just annabethyoga.com, spelled just like it sounds. Also on Instagram, that's my handle. It's at annabethyoga. So Instagram is like just where I post content and other things, right? So different pieces of information and insights, information about live classes that I teach, both in person and online. So those are the main places where we can connect.
Yeah, and I'll have all of Anna's info in the show notes, so you're just one click away from connecting with Anna. I'll also put all the resources mentioned in the show notes as well, like Katie Bowman's website. Anna, thank you so much for being on the show. It was a lovely conversation.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me back and asking me such great questions.
I wanted to share my personal insight on this really important interview, in my opinion, because I am probably the most skeptical person when it comes to yoga and cannabis together. I come from people who celebrate cannabis. Growing up, I've always had friends who love marijuana. I've tried my whole life to like it, to be honest. I never could like it. And it wasn't until this actual interview with Anna, I guess I always correlated cannabis with partying and fun. And what this interview has taught me, what Anna has taught me, is this can be a very deep spiritual practice, a way to connect to your emotional body, a way to go inward, a way not to numb out, but a way to tune in. And so I share this with you because right after my interview with Anna, a few days later, I did my own ganja yoga in my home, in my living room. And it was profound. And I did some deep healing work of my own. It started with a very slow, restorative yoga practice. I set my intention. I took my method of cannabis. And then it shifted into more like from the restorative practice, it became more meditative. And, long story short, similar to Anna's experience, she shared the root chakra. She found a profound healing there. I had that as well. And I know Ganja yoga is not limited to just healing the root. I know, you can heal many different things, but I found that interesting. And it was just so necessary for me when I was in that place of needing healing. I really, really needed that help to heal my root on my own. And it was so empowering doing it all on my own. And I know being a teacher, I know being a yoga teacher and studying this stuff helps me, has helped me to get to that place where I could do Ganja yoga and I could help myself go deeper with the knowledge I've learned. But this is all just to say that I am the biggest skeptic, and I always, carry everything with a grain of salt. And I wasn't completely sold about Ganja yoga. And then after my interview with Anna, I was, and then I tried it, and now I really am. And so I just want to share that with you. If you're on the fence, if you were a skeptic like me, just see if it helps you. It has helped me immensely. I definitely will continue. And I hope that this shared experience, what I'm sharing with you right now, maybe inspires you to seek your own healing in whatever way that works for you. And one thing I want to say, last thing I want to say is guru culture. I am anti-guru culture. I don't believe a guru can heal you. I believe they can hold space for you and they can facilitate healing. But I believe you do your own healing. And I feel very much like Ganja yoga created that for me. So yeah, that's it. And I would love to hear from you about your experience, if you try this out yourself, or what you thought of the episode. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. And if you receive value from the show, please write us a 5-star review, and or you can Text this episode to just one friend who you know will love yoga and podcast. We thank you so much in advance for the huge favor. Word of mouth helps support the show in reaching a greater audience, and we could not grow without you. If you want to connect with us, our email is yogaandpodcast@gmail.com. The and is spelled out YOGAAND podcast@gmail. Please follow us on Instagram at Yoga and Podcast. We are now on TikTok. The handle is also Yoga and Podcast. When you follow us, we will follow you right back on both platforms. Music is by Mama Duke. Graphics, guest booking, and media by me, your host, Ashley Weber. I am so grateful for you. Thank you for listening.